Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Bill, you sound good to me. How do I sound?
Very good.
Sharon, how's it sound?
Sounds very good. I
Okay.
have to make introductions. How do I sound?
Good.
You sound good as well.
Okay.
All right. I have the most current slide deck up. Thanks for the edits, Sharon.
And I will be driving.
And now begin. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's live broadcast, the Beginner's Guide to the Freedom of Information Act and Public Information Act. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Bill Tolson is the Vice President of Global Compliance and EDiscovery for Archive 360 and has spent more than 20 years advising organizations on all aspects of archiving, information governance, and EDiscovery. Bill's a regular speaker at industry events and the author of numerous ebooks, articles, and blogs. Jim McCarthy is the Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel here at Archive 360. Jim's not only been providing legal guidance for over 25 years to local, county, and state government bodies, he's also an adjunct professor teaching the next generation on aspects of law, including FOIA. And just a quick note on Archive 360. Archive 360 is an intelligent information management and archiving platform. Our software is used by more than 2,000 organizations worldwide, including by local, state, and federal government agencies in the US to help them responsibly manage their regulatory, legal, and business intelligence obligations. Our customers achieve this by classifying, securing, analyzing, archiving, searching, and managing their structured and unstructured data. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Bill, who will begin this presentation by discussing what we're going to cover today.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to jump on our presentation today. Very quickly, this is what we're going to be basically discussing today. You know, in the state of Texas, which I know a lot of the attendees are in. FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act, is basically equal to the Public Information Act. So throughout the presentation, we'll be talking about both FOIA and PIA as the same thing. So we'll cover Jim will cover basically what FOIA and PIA is, and some of the you know, legal questions around it and things like that. And then I will get into talking about some of the challenges around complying with a Freedom of Information Act request. You know, what information is included, what's not, what are some of the issues that many state and local agencies are running into. And then we'll talk about briefly some of the new things on the horizon, some of the new technology and processes, by the way, that will help agencies get their arms around the whole PIA FOIA process. So with that, Jim, I will turn it over to you to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Bill. Hi again. I'm Jim McCarthy, General Counsel at Archive 360. I have represented public entities on FOIA matters for the past 25 years at the municipal, county, and state levels, and I think I've seen every what's the right word? Every perversion of this process play out in clerks' offices, public meetings, and courtrooms throughout the country. But I've also seen the laudable qualities of this law work too, and which is at its heart the right of the citizens to get information about their government from the government. So the slide that we're looking at now asks the question, how efficient is FOIA? So on the front end, that is what the public sees. I would give back slide one, Bill.
Sorry.
On the front end, you know, what the public sees, I would say that it's very good. As the chart shows, roughly about 2/3 of all FOIA requests are honored and replied to, with about 1/3 of them not being answered or incomplete. So that looks pretty good. That's a pretty good for government work. On the back end, that is the part that we do, the processing, the part that you're involved with, it's not so good. And the reason for that, there's several things. I think we addressed some of the matters on the next slide, Bill. What we've done here is we've taken an example of one of our clients. This is the DOJ, the Department of Justice, just to show you how much work is involved. Why is the back end of this so hard? So what we've done here is taken an average year, 2018, and I've identified that the DOJ received about 830,000 separate requests for FOIA information, documents of the government. Now, the time that it has taken to process these requests varies, but you can put them into two buckets. One bucket is a simple track, and the simple track takes about 31 days for the DOJ to respond to a single one of these 830,000 requests. Most of their requests, however, fall into the second bucket, and that's the complex track. And believe it or not, it takes more than 2 months of work by the DOJ to address that single request. Times 830,000 of them, you start to get an idea, Bill, about how much work is involved in processing a simple FOIA request.
Well, and Jim, I remember several administrations ago that the Department of Justice, was sitting on an average of 800,000 or 900,000 requests in there, and their time to respond back then was well over a year, which actually violated the FOIA laws. But what are you going to do with the Department of Justice?
Yeah, we're going to see some of the rights that citizens have when these governmental agencies don't comply in time. And I don't think we went over it, but the time deadlines for these FOIA requests, Bill, are crazy short for records managers to comply with. For example, at the federal level, it's 20 business days. And as you can see, even on its best day, on these simple track measures, they never are able to comply with such a short statutory time.
Right.
Slide, Bill. So there are some limiting features that records managers can rely on. Let's work from the bottom up here. This is something we always get, Bill. Vexatious requests, the busybody at either the municipal, state, or federal level. There's always some group or some individual that's making constant requests for documents on a public agency. They get to know them by first name after a while because they're making them so often. I remember representing a library once, and the town busybody would make a request of this smallish library pretty much every day.
Wow.
And the amount of time that it took for this small staff of folks to honor these requests, which are mandatory, took away from the work of the organization. So different states have different manners of dealing with these kinds of folks, but the overriding direction from courts is that you have to honor them. Everybody has a right to ask as often as they want for documents. Payment. Let's talk about payment for a moment. This is always widely misunderstood. Organizations, states, they have a right to request payment for not only the document copying, but actually the gathering of the documents themselves, provided they're reasonable. The problem, of course, is that what has been deemed reasonable by many of the courts is wildly underfunding the actual request. In other words, if it costs an organization $1 to actually produce the document, they probably would be able to charge about 10 cents. So yeah. Payment on these types of matters rarely compensates the organization for the time. Now, the other limitation working up the list is privileged information. Obviously, when you make a FOIA request for governmental troop movements or for strategies to overcome a defensive position, you're not going to get those kinds of documents. So you're not going to get employment records of different people either. These are type of privileged information. But what I will tell you is that the idea of privilege, Bill, is almost always overused by these organizations, and they get stung for it in court.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is that probably about 1% of an organization's documents are truly privileged and not able to be obtained by citizens. But probably well over 5 to 10% are claimed as privileged. So that spread, when it's litigated, usually comes out against the organization's interest. The last one I wanted to touch on just briefly was a vague request. This is probably the number one problem that processors have with the request. Bill, my experience is that when you get a request in from an average citizen making it, it's not as defined as it should be. And therefore, the records custodian has a hard time figuring out what the heck is being asked for. But they have a duty to sort of figure it out. So this is a problem area because you're still under that time constraint, and you're under the gun to get it out, but you don't know what they're asking for. So those are just some of the things that we're.
Well, and Jim, in Texas, I know there's a specific process where, you know, if a citizen asks for data or information and it is overly broad or it contains privileged information, or, you know, the agency determines that it really had nothing to do with the running of the business, that request goes to the Texas Attorney General, who then has, I think, 20 days to make a decision on whether it's going to be addressed or turned down.
You're exactly right.
And then obviously from there, you know, if it's you know, turned down, then that's where it can potentially lead into litigation.
Yep. The PIA statute in Texas is probably one of the more sophisticated FOIA type laws that at the state level. What documents are subject to that? That's what we have. We're just on the next slide, Bill. So what is a document or data that's subject to a FOIA request? The bottom line is that public records probably is everything that an organization keeps in documentary form, meaning emails, files, reports. What it doesn't include are answers to questions. Usually people mistake, Bill, a FOIA request for information for answering my question. So if they ask the New York County, how do you tabulate, you know, overtime pay for the, you know, for police? That's not a legitimate request because it's not asking for a specific document. So usually people make that mistake, and that answer is very quickly responded to by saying, this is not asking for a document, your request is denied. So,
you know, Jim, a complicating factor due to what's been going on with COVID-19 here is that besides a lot of these agency personnel working from home, they're also using now collaboration applications, you know, like Microsoft Teams or WebEx or Zoom or all these other things. And, you know, for example, in Teams, they possibly could be doing, you know, video meetings and things like that. I think most lawyers would look at that and say, yeah, you know, if you're talking agency business, then that stuff needs to be captured and made available if a citizen asks for it in a FOIA request. And I know for a fact, in talking to lots of state and local agencies around the country, they're not prepared for that.
I think there will be an absolute floodgate of litigation once this COVID pandemic sort of is in our rearview mirror. That's one of the many issues that will be addressed in FOIA, Bill, without a doubt. We've put these things and these stopgap measures into place so quickly, we haven't really figured out how to comply with all of the other laws that come into play, like FOIA.
Well, and you know, many state and local agencies were having a difficult time just keeping track of and producing agency files and emails and things like that. And now you add all this new technology. For example, on Teams, a Teams chat or a Teams video call, or when you share a file, all that kind of stuff. All of those things are actually stored in different parts of Office 365. So it's not a straightforward, put a hold on it. It's a lot of work. And if you miss it, then, will you be sitting in a courtroom one day having some FOIA requester, accuse you of hiding data?
Yeah. So let's get into that. Now, the next slide, we talk about what are the speed bumps. How come it takes so long on the back end where our records managers are processing this? And I think the very first road bump that everybody comes into is the sheer amount of the information that's on there that is being captured. Technology allowed us to capture so many more documents now. The amount of it is hard to process for FOIA requests. Couple that with the idea that we can't find the data in most cases. Records managers have so many different silos of information in disparate locations that it's hard to respond to a FOIA request because they simply don't know all the repositories.
Well, and Jim, even worse, a lot of especially local agencies under PIA or FOIA don't have records managers, and it comes down to the individual custodians to be able to keep and secure the data, and then also find it when the request comes in. So, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the second half of the presentation.
Yep. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide there, Bill. Yeah, so these are some of the other reasons that speed bumps exist on the back end, which is the biggest one here is that most organizations don't have a central set of rules and policies for how FOIA is processed or how their state Open Public Records Act is processed, and that information is not generated to the next employee who takes over. There's often no testing or fine-tuning of these processes, no auditing of how we're storing it. Significantly, there's no policy enforcement of how they're done. And usually these things, Bill, are tested when they land in court. And then,
yeah.
And that's always the last time you want to be testing this out for the first time. So let's get some more detail, Bill. On the next slide, what I do is I track. These are the sheer count of lawsuits for FOIA just against the Department of Justice, just this one client. And you can see how many lawsuits are filed each year. And what they face when it gets to this point, Bill, is that it's a triple threat, I call it. You're not only paying for your own attorneys to represent you as the entity who didn't respond, you're paying the fines that are imposed for not getting documents within that time frame. And significantly, and that's why we put the most dollar signs there, most of these laws provide that if you don't provide the documents, you pay their legal fees. And these amount to several millions of dollars each year. I think the last count I had for DOJ was that they probably spent, and it's Republican and Democrat are equally at fault here. I think it was about $41 million, $40 million in the last 2 years, just paying the other guy's legal fees.
Well, and Jim, I'm told by many of my attorney friends, especially in the defense side, the defense counsel, the worst thing that they think can happen to them is losing and being forced with paying the opposing counsel's fees. Yeah, it's just like a major bad thing for them. It's
like scoring a goal against yourself in soccer. It's that bad, Bill. But that's not.
I was looking for that, and I couldn't come up with something like that. So I'm glad you did.
But you know what? As much as it hurts to pay the other guy's legal fees, that's really only a fraction of the real costs of dealing with a FOIA request. On the next slide, and this is the most telling part, this is really where this money is spent. As you can see, let's just look at 2018. And we're just looking again, this is DOG again. This is how much they spent in FOIA requests in 2018. Roughly $545 million. The legal fees were only, if you could say that, only $41 million there. The lion's share of that cost, Bill, was the processing time. That 31 days for the simple, that 70 days for the complex track. Those days times how many requests there are was about $505 million for the DOJ in 2018. Now, when you multiply this processing costs and sanctions by every governmental unit on every state, every county, and every local level, you start to get the sense of just how much money is spent and wasted on FOIA requests. And I say wasted not because the people aren't processing it to their level best. It's just that there's a way to get that number in blue on your screen down significantly. And it will also result in paying less of the other guy's fees. So how do we
Well,
do it?
and Jim, I mean, it always boggles my mind in looking at this, in that these laws are not new. They've been around for, you know, a long time, even at the state and local level. And you know, it's the blue versus the red here. You know, the 504 million in processing. You know, if you look at that at a state or local level, that's a big part of their budget. And you know, as one attorney general told me once, you know, we could have bought all of the best equipment and applications, and saved, you know, 2/3 of the cost that we're spending in just wasting time trying to find this stuff if we had the right technology and processes in place.
Yes. So Bill, what I've done in the first 10 or 11 slides here is I've presented the problem. And now it's my time to run away and let you tell everyone, how do you solve it?
Oh man, okay. So yes, I will start to address this, and you know, I have been involved at the state and local and also federal level on these things for a long time, so I have some interesting experience around it. But as Jim mentioned, you know, at the beginning, one of the biggest problems that all, you know, government agencies face is the amount of data that they're dealing with. And you know, even down to the local level, it's a big pie, and obviously it grows every year. And it's going to do nothing but potentially accelerate. You know, as you can see on the right-hand side, you know, IDC predicts the average person is going to have 5,000 digital transactions per day. A lot of that is basically, you know, looking at creating, filing data information. You know, we've gotten to the point where, you know, the average, you know, end user sitting in a cubicle, you know, it comes, you know, face to face with, you know, 30, 40, 50 megabytes worth of new data per day. And you know, what are they supposed to do with it? You know, it's one of those things where, you know, a company will put out a retention policy, you know, that's 30 pages long with 8-point type of all kinds of things, and they expect end users to follow it, and in reality, they don't have the time. So, you know, we get into what you know, people in the records management industry refer to as the 5-second rule, which is most end users, looking at a piece of information, whether it's an email or a document or whatever it happens to be, will look at it, and if it's going to take them more than 5 seconds to make an intelligent decision about what to do with it, they will either delete it immediately or mark it as keep forever, which obviously, you know, goes against most corporate retention policies. Isn't necessarily a bad thing for state and you know, local government agencies, but it just shows you that the amount of data is just so much that it's unbelievable. And I get into here, and what makes up data overload is really the variety of the data, the volume of the data, and the velocity. How fast is it coming in? How much is coming in? And then, you know, what kinds of data is, you know, PDFs and PowerPoints and Excel and Word files and, you know, hyperlinks and stuff like that. So
I think you hit on it, Bill. It's not just how much, it's where, how many different locations and different places that this data is kept. When this law was passed 50 years ago, it was just a file. You know,
yeah,
there were
paper.
files, and you went to the file, you copied it, and you finished the request. But that is kept in so many different places now. I think your next slide is identifying just a few of them.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I especially local government agencies, but even state, and you know, I'll talk about that in a bit, some of my experience there. But really, in a lot of these cases, you know, especially state and local agencies are dealing with legacy technology. You know, old computers. You know, file systems, shared drives. You know, a lot of agency employees just keep all their data on their, obviously on their computers, because there's no other place to put it in a lot of cases. One of the things, and SharePoint, for example, one of the things that we found over the last 5 years is, as these offerings like Box and you know, Google Cloud and these kinds of things have shown up, agency employees have taken to dragging and dropping, you know, information up into their personal clouds, because hey, it's a great place to keep it. It's backed up all the time. And then other things like social media and you know, a lot of agency employees, based on necessity, are ended up doing you know, state and local business on their smartphones, just because.
Well, that's a great point, Bill. Yeah, on company business on their phone devices.
Well, and that's you know, that's a big question that I get a lot, and it goes from state to state, but the question usually centers around, well, gee, if I had to respond to an email on agency business on my personal smartphone, is my smartphone now part of the PIA FOIA process, and can it be part of the EDiscovery process, Jim?
I will tell you, Bill, that the last case I defended for a very small town mayor, who obviously was working on his phone, was that the mayor, who also was a plumber in his town, had to deliver his smartphone to an attorney in a litigation over hiring the police, you know, and it put him out of his other business for about a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, and by the way, there is a case in Texas, a deciding case that basically said, you know, yes, your smartphones are you know, part of the PIA process, and if there is state business on there, then yes, you have to turn it over. And again,
Yeah.
obviously with EDiscovery as well. I mean, I've been involved with that for 15 years, and there's been a lot of case precedent, you know, around that. Your personal email account or your personal smartphone, you know, if there's reason to believe that there's discoverable or relevant data on that, then yes, it is open to inspection.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's kind of show you graphically what I'm talking about. And this is the problem that many state and local agencies and even federal run into, is that you got this data decentralization. You got all of these different systems creating data, storing data in their own silos, and then you have all of the agency employees, you know, with their own, you know, personal workstations and laptops. And there's just so many places that this potentially irrelevant FOIA data can be sitting, that, you know, it does take, you know, a lot of time and money to do that. And again, the little red arrows are basically, I have worked with, you know, agencies and companies, you know, doing discovery and information requests, where, you know, you got to look everywhere, and I have found, you know, relevant agency data sitting on, an employee's digital camera memory stick, for example, hanging in their cubicle. And it wasn't just a picture, it was actually a PST. Not sure why I was there. I couldn't get the answer out of the employee, but this is really the problem right here is data. FOIA regulated data can be anywhere, and this is why it takes so much time trying to find it. So really you get down to like I say, it's anywhere, and basically it's going to take all of your time to find it. So when a FOIA search crops up, somebody has to go into all of these various data silos, and then somebody, whether it's the custodian themselves or somebody else who goes to each and every laptop and desktop looking for something. This is the issue. By the way, this is exactly the same issue with litigation and e-discovery. This is why it costs so much. Standard e-discovery request costs so much. I mean, it could be in the millions of dollars just to round up the information. But the same with FOIA. It's time consuming, it's risky, and obviously it's expensive. And one point, and this again, FOIA and e-discovery are very close. You get down into the concept of, well, gee, I'm looking for information on a certain topic, and you basically send an email to all of the agency employees saying, hey, look for this kind of stuff, and send it to me. And I've seen opposing counsel, when this gets to an e-discovery, process, basically say, well, wait a minute now. You're asking employees to find potentially smoking gun data on themselves. What do you think you're going to get? And the judge basically agreed, and his comment was, it's like having the fox guard the hen house. It's just not potentially legally defensible. So just something to consider. But we get into besides the lack of centralized data management, you get into this legacy information management technologies like SharePoint, for example, or an agency, a medium size or a state agency might have a FileNet or a Documentum or an open text kind of a document management system. They're number one, they're expensive. They're complex as all get out to use. The security is questionable, especially these days with all the stuff going on. They're slow to update when you're talking about a centralized information management, legacy information management system sitting on premise, sitting in the agency.
And it could be on your backups as well, Bill, right? You could have
Exactly.
retired them long ago.
Yeah, I mean, if and I always say this, and Jim, I assume you agree, but if you get the right lawyer, opposing counsel who understands technology, I mean, they could tear any of these things apart, and get large sums of money in return, just because there are so many places within these information management records.
You hit it right on the head, Bill. The right lawyer can make it look like, that game that people play with laser pointers on cats. They could just start jumping from hoop to hoop, and they do it for a purpose. There's a big payday when entities cannot respond to public information requests.
Well, and I've been told by my lawyer friends that they have very, very detailed templates on how to do this, and they're, when they go after a company or an agency, and when you ask them why all of this stuff, and basically I've had them look at me and basically say, I want them to give up and settle before it ever gets into court. Yeah. I want to make my money and not have to go to court, so I'm going to snow them. I'm going to pile an avalanche on them with all of these things that I know they can't respond to.
That's exactly what happens. In the last one I defended, it was a relatively small organization, and it was about 15 pages of documents, and they knew that they could not get them. They targeted that person who was a part-time employee with the request. And long story short, they paid about $150,000 in legal fees. This tiny organization that had about a, $50,000 annual budget, and they did it for just that reason.
Oh yeah.
So, there's
Yeah.
trolls out there.
Yes, and they have a lot of consulting help to help them zero in on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned this. Jim's mentioned it, up front, but response times for federal or for federal FOIA and for state PIA, like Jim said, it's not measured in months. Here we're talking about days. And this is where lots of people, especially the smaller agencies, will get into trouble, in that they can't find the data in the reasonable amount of time. They can't make these deadlines. So all of a sudden, it's a file complained with their attorney general, which then it turns into EDiscovery, and all of a sudden, there's a lot more money being spent just because of inefficient information management.
Yes.
What happens if an agency can't respond to time? Again, we've said this several times now: litigation and EDiscovery. And like Jim has alluded to, there are people out there and attorneys out there, law firms, that make a very good living doing this, knowing that their state and local agencies can't respond. So therefore, I know how to word a FOIA request just right. And all of a sudden, you're taking up a lot of agency time and budget.
Bill may have cut out there. Sharon, you're.
Did I cut out?
No, everything was fine.
Okay.
There's Bill.
I didn't go anywhere.
Oh, that was my end. Forgive me, Bill.
Okay. So we have mentioned this quite heavily, the FOIA to EDiscovery cycle. And it really is as simple as we've talked to. Over on the right, you see the electronic discovery reference model that's used, federally and in many states. The FRCP, federal, what is it? Federal
Rules of Civil Procedure.
God,
Yeah.
I've written thousands of pages on it, and I just blanked out. That's embarrassing. but yes, it really is. It really is as simple. So what some agencies have turned to doing. One of the most obvious things, we'll get to this at the end, is put the right technology and processes in place. But in a lot of cases, what agencies will do is utilize EDiscovery technology, which, by the way, is great technology. It just happens to be expensive. If you use a Clearwell EDiscovery appliance or Relativity, one of the other things, I mean, they're great collection and review devices, but they're expensive as all get out. But a lot of agencies have been forced into going that way just because they're getting into trouble. But it does, a lot of this stuff does eventually turn into EDiscovery. I remember, probably 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, I was meeting with the Attorney General in it's either North Dakota or South Dakota. Very, very nice lady. And we were talking about the need to archive and stuff like that. And she said, really what's pushing them is FOIA. And I said, well, so what's the issue? And she said, well, we can't meet the vast majority of the FOIA requests. Therefore, they all turn into litigation, and we're spending a fortune. So we need to start actually managing this information in a more viable, more common sense manner. And it really does come down to that. It really does come down to if you actually just manage the information and have the right processes in place, you're going to be good.
Yep, I agree. The cost of putting these systems into place pale in comparison, Bill.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And here's a pictorial run through of that cycle I just talked about. You get a FOIA request, it goes into the FOIA officer for the agency, and the first thing they determine is it a valid request? Are they asking for something that really has to do with agency business? So then the FOIA officer is asking IT to go out and find it. Sometimes that's not IT. Sometimes it's just the individual agency personnel. But you're going through this whole cycle of going out and just trying to find the relevant data, and it can be in many, many different repositories on many, many different custodians' laptops, and it takes time, and time is money, obviously. So then, you know, they find what they think they could find, goes back to the FOIA request. They determine that, you know, it's not what I was looking for. They didn't do a full response, or they refused, you know, just in general, whatever. But then, you know, the FOIA requester goes out to their outside attorney and they start filing lawsuits. And, you know, it is as simple as that. I mean, I've talked to many states, you know, attorney general organizations and stuff. And this is an ongoing problem, and it's an ongoing, you know, budget issue as well, because this takes time and money. So what's needed? Jim mentioned this, and we'll get deeper into it. But tested and audited data handling processes, and it's as simple as that. What is the process within a given agency's office? What happens with the daily data? You know, the emails, the Teams chats, the you know, creation of agency documents and all that kind of stuff. Are there in place processes that say this is what you must do with these documents? You know, I should number one, don't delete it. Number two, put it in a specific folder, for example, or on a specific shared drive, whatever it happens to be. The second level issue here is that, and in the graphics I showed, you know, data could be sitting in many places, including, you know, employee laptops and desktops. The next step of the process is consolidating the data. If you can consolidate it into a single shared drive for the department.
I think that's the key. That's the key, Bill.
Exactly, and put
single
the appropriate
managed
security
repository.
around. Yeah, that way you're not searching all over the place for it. You know one place to go. And I know, by the way, I've been in the business for a long time. I know it's not as simple as saying just consolidate it, but there are ways to do it. And if you can't consolidate it into a single managed repository, maybe it's two. Maybe it's the email system, and then everything else goes into a department shared drive. But it's better than checking 100 different laptops. I mean, even to the point where I've worked with agencies where, you know, everything they do on their workstation or laptop is automatically synced to their to a shared drive, or nowadays into their OneDrive account, which is centrally manageable by IT. So, you know, it's really doing the data consolidation, adopting technologies that make this easier for people. When you have the budget, don't put it on the bottom of the budget. Put it up in the top so it gets done. And whatever. Nowadays, with all the PII restrictions going on, having a technology that can automatically review and redact PII and things within documents that are going to have to be turned over is actually a big time-saving and money-saving process. And then eventually adopting machine learning and AI, you know, predictive information governance and so on. You know, that's just surfacing right now in a really productive way, but keep an eye out for that, and we could talk to you about it as well.
So what do you recommend, Bill?
So again, I know we're running out of time. We need to leave time for questions, but again, like I said, processes and procedures, put them in place, test them, and enforce them. Audit them and enforce them. I mean, one of the biggest issues with putting processes in place is, you know, you get a letter, a memo saying this is what you need to do, and then no one ever checks on it again. And then people, you know, do what they are most comfortable with doing, and that's not always the process. So put a process in place and audit it and enforce it. Consolidate the data when you can and where you can. You know, as much as you can. And again, it's getting much more simple and effective nowadays, with especially for those agencies using Office 365. You can utilize your OneDrive account as your sink, and everything goes into there except for the email. It's a huge time saver, especially for FOIA search. And then consolidate the data, and you know, instead of, you know, leaving it in all these different places, Number one, you probably should make a rule never to do it never to do agency business on smartphones if you can manage that. Don't allow employee, personal class, those kinds of things. But if you can consolidate, the individual employees' data into their OneDrive account, for example, in Office 365, then for FOIA search, it's basically, doing a search against the email system and then against the consolidated, archive or the OneDrive accounts. Within Office 365, you can do a search against all OneDrive accounts, at the admin level if you have that capability. And then again, here's what I'm talking about with Office 365. You have your email exchange online within the Office 365 cloud, and then you have everybody syncing to their OneDrive. So then all of a sudden, potentially you could even consolidate this further into, for example, a single agency-owned tenant, for example, in Office or in Azure, and then do a single FOIA search.
So we're not only consolidating, we're making a smarter search.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
within, for example, Azure and the various applications in there, they have very sophisticated search capabilities, so that you're going to, if any kind of data or even related data is in there, you're going to be able to find it, review it, redact where necessary, and then produce it very quickly.
Okay.
So recommendations to end this, and we'll get to questions. You need to be efficient. So putting efficiency around your FOIA PIA response requires just basic information management processes. What do I have the processes in place, and are my agency employees following it? That's huge.
Yeah.
Just put a policy in place and make sure people follow it, and then consolidate all the agency data into as few data silos as possible, and then in the future look to automate where
I
you
think
can.
the last one, Bill, is it. We're making a smarter search by taking advantage of the technology that's out there. And I think when we do that, records managers will find that their job is a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot less costly.
Yeah, the new AI technology around records and information management is really impressive, and it's being made very easy to use, so you don't have to be a data scientist or anything like that. I'm really excited about what we're doing.
So easy a lawyer can use it?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, so easy my granddaughter can use it. With that, I will turn it back over to Sharon for questions. Thank you.
Sure. At this time, if you do have a question you'd like to submit to Bill and Jim, please use that Q&A button that's on the toolbar of your webinar platform. But we do have a few questions that came in beforehand. The Texas Public Information Act is specific to the state of Texas. Does the federal FOIA law override it?
Yeah, Jim, I think that's probably for you. I think that's an interesting question.
So think about it in two types of request. The first one, to Texas, it involves Texas documents maintained by Texas municipalities and counties and the state itself. A FOIA request is directed to a federal agency. So this is not a question of whether one law will override the other, but it's whether or not the information request is made to either a state agency or a federal agency. And
so it's a states' rights type of thing. If it has to do with Texas data, then a federal agency wouldn't have any say-so over it. Correct.
If it's you're asking for documents from the federal court located in Austin, that's a federal FOIA request.
Mm. Okay, so each state has its own. I think all states have their own FOIA laws and processes, and there would be no reason to go to a federal FOIA.
Yeah, it depends on what agency is being requested, not which law is applicable.
Okay.
We have another question that came in. My agency has limited budget, and I don't see purchasing any technology software anytime in the near future. With that in mind, what can my agency do to streamline the FOIA PIA process?
Well, that's that's probably a situation where most, especially local and state agencies are in. And I live in Colorado, and I've talked to our Colorado ones too, and they all have the same budget request. Nobody budgeted it, therefore, new, technology or new software capabilities are really not on the horizon, at least for the next year. So it really does come down to putting in best practice information management and archiving processes. I mean, that's like I said, I think a minute or two ago, that's really the biggest thing that many agencies haven't had the time or haven't been driven to do is putting in those processes that say, okay, for everybody in this agency, this is how we're going to handle data. Number one, you never delete an agency email. Probably shouldn't delete any email that comes in on your agency email address. And then we're going to also every agency related document is going to go into the department share drive or into the OneDrive account so that it can be synced to the cloud.
Bill, I'm guessing that the person or agency that asked that question is already paying for this in spades. They're paying disparate systems.
That's a good
paying
point.
Archived and legacy information systems. And if they did streamline, they'd find they're paying less. It's not a cost. This is something else.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it and we measure it as an ROI. I'm spending, for example, $100,000 a year in responding to my small agency requests. If I spent $50,000 of that, I would save the $100,000. Therefore, even though it's not in the budget, you could save budget. And I know the realities of these kinds of things. If it's not already in the budget, it's in a lot of cases it's not going to show up. But it really is a total cost of ownership and an ROI question.
Yeah.
And for those agency personnel that want to make the case, to their management, we can sure help. And again, it gets down to a relatively simple ROI calculation.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions that I want to ask you guys. I believe parts of certain responsive documents are privileged. Do I need an attorney to review my request?
This is always the hardest thing, I think, for records managers to deal with, Bill, because they are not trained and we shouldn't rely on them to make this kind of call. But when you think about budget, and if somebody makes a request for emails from September to November, how are they going to learn whether or not this stuff is privileged or not without engaging their outside counsel or their in-house counsel? And what's that going to cost?
Well, that's the review. That's the review function that same as EDiscovery, and it's hugely expensive.
Yeah, and this is where the predictive information governance and your machine learning, Bill, that you were referring to, this is where that takes over. It culls that information so you don't have to spend so much time with counsel. And let's face it, we want to spend as least time as possible with our lawyers, right? Yeah. So this is the way to do it. This saves money by doing it the right way.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, it gets down to an ROI. I mean, looking back at the legal part of it, let's say you generate a potential set of responsive documents that are, I'm going to be, probably way out of bounds here, but say 100,000 documents. Do you just blindly give those to the outside requester, or best practices and probably legal defensibility would say, no, you have to go through and review them because there might be, citizen PII in there that you shouldn't be giving out. Therefore, you have to have trained people to review the documents looking for that sort of stuff. And for example, for some odd, I've written about this, so it's not that odd, but for some reason I know the fact that the average legally trained person, whether it be a paralegal or a lawyer, can review 45 to 55 pages per hour looking for relevance or privilege. And you know, if they're getting paid, even contract lawyers, contract review lawyers might be getting paid anywhere from $50 to $100 an hour. You know, 55 documents per hour into 100,000, you're looking at an awfully large bill for one FOIA request.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, do you want to add to that, Jim?
No, I didn't know if you had another question.
I do. I know I have responsive data, but cannot find it. What do I do?
Ooh.
So I think that's an honest question from a records manager. They know it's there. They just don't know where to look. Like you said, Bill, it's so many disparate locations. So the best way to answer that is with an example. I had a client who needed some documents on a federal project. It was a contractor for the Army. And we were suspecting that one of the subcontractors was doing something. So we made a FOIA request on the Army. The Army knew it had documents that were responsive. And maybe because they were military, they did the right thing immediately. They told us absolutely right away, this is going to take a lot more time than we're entitled to take. But understand that we're looking for the information. Because they were upfront right at the start and got a hold of us immediately, we took no action. And like Bill said, it took the better part of a year to get all the information. It was worth it, Bill. We prevailed in the suit, but it took a full 8 months for the Army to get this stuff done. So my advice on that question is to reach out quickly and tell them exactly where you are with this request and keep them updated like the Army did with me. I'll probably receive 10 email status reports before we got the stuff 8 months later.
Well, and
they avoided the lawsuit.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with it, and I've seen examples of that, but I've also seen examples on the other side, even in a FOIA thing where you know, after a short period of time, the agency, you know, came back and said, we can't find this stuff. We know we have it, but we can't find it. And you know, they eventually throw themselves on the mercy of the court. And you know, in this one case, the judge basically responded in the case saying, you know, I fully understand what you're saying. I understand it's not something, you didn't engineer this to happen, but it doesn't matter. Go spend the money and find it. And they had to go out and hire $300 an hour consultants to you know, spend months going through this stuff to find it. So it will come in a lot of cases. And I tell people, especially on the legal side, there's rarely a right and wrong, black and white legally. It's going to depend on the defense and opposing counsel, but also the judge. You know, what that judge thinks on that given day is very important. So there's no slam dunks in the legal sense.
No, but he or she is likely to rule in your favor if you can show that you kept that communication line open.
Exactly. If you're showing that you tried to put the systems in place, you trained the employees, you documented it, you documented your search, and you made a good faith attempt to do it and still couldn't find what you knew is there, then yeah, I think, you know, most of the time the judge is going to say, agreed.
All right, I've got one more question and you've got 1 minute to answer.
Okay.
How do I deal with the agency busybody that requests documents every day?
Oh, Jim, that's yours.
Yeah, the short answer is you do have to deal with them. Make friends, not enemies. So, and otherwise you're just going to generate more and more requests. You will not be able to limit their rights to make requests under FOIA or the state agencies. So don't avoid them. Take them, bring them in closer.
Take them out to lunch. Befriend them. Find out why they're really doing it.
That was a good question to end on.
It was, yeah.
Okay, so look, we're at the top of the hour and we are going to wrap things up. This concludes our webinar for today. And if you have any questions after this webinar is concluded, feel free to reach out at the contact information shown on the screen. A link to the recording and the slides will be sent out to all attendees of this webinar within the next day, and we will post everything onto our website. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank Bill and Jim for the great webinar today, and thank you for hanging with us to the end, and we wish everyone a very great day. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jim. A lot of fun.